Welcome to the Ugly Bug Podcast, a production of the Ugly Bug Fly Shop and Crazy Rainbow Fly Fishing.
Welcome to the Ugly Bug Podcast. Today we sit down with CiCi Oliver, talk about how CiCi carved out a niche within the fly fishing industry as a young lady. I think you'll really enjoy the episode. First, let's step away and hear a word from our sponsor.
The Ugly Bug Podcast is proudly sponsored by Flyoming, Wyoming-rooted fly fishing apparel and accessories challenging the traditional mold, designed by anglers for anglers.
What's up, C? How are you?
Hey, Blake. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining me tonight.
Of course. Wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
I think we've probably got a few people a little interested in a young lady like yourself and fly fishing and how you got in fly fishing. But the easiest way to explain it might be kind of start from the beginning. Like, where'd you go to school? Let's start there. Where are you from?
I'm from a small town right outside of Omaha, Nebraska called Valley, Nebraska. Population about 3,400 on a good day. Just a little small town. I went to high school in an even smaller town about 30 minutes away from Valley called Arlington High School. And that was the come up. Lived in Valley, small town Nebraska gal, nothing crazy.
Cool. And lived on water or got into fishing then? Or
Yeah, so I grew up on a lake, and so my brother and I, we were spin fishermen when we were really young. We loved to go outside, catch some largemouth bass. We had stripers in our lake, catfish, kind of everything you could think of on that side of things. But yeah, that's where the love really started for fishing in general. And then we had done that so much. My dad had gone on a couple guided trips just for work purposes, and he bought us the world's shittiest little Cabela rod, and we would, run some poppers over the lake, and that's kind of my first introduction into fly fishing.
cool. Just bass in it, or were there sunfish and
Some
little odds and
sunfish,
ends?
some crappie, walleye, all the fun species, everything that fights a little bit. So we are definitely pretty enamored with that. That was a huge part of our upbringing.
Cool. And your mom fished as well, or just your dad, or?
It was kind of a whole family thing. My mom grew up in Colorado, so she's a farm girl, a pretty outdoorsy girl. My dad grew up in Nebraska, but that was definitely something we always shared as a family. Us getting home from school, parents getting home from work, it was just kind of our typical MO. We'd throw the rods out for a little bit right before dinner and catch a couple fish, and that was just how we spent our time.
Sweet. And then so high school, you were interested in it. From high school, where were you off to then, or?
Yeah, so in high school, I think that was when I first started to realize, obviously when you're going through high school, they try to get you to pick your major in college, and I just couldn't really think of anything else that I enjoyed or really cared enough to study, but I had the opportunity to go to college, so I really started to seriously look for schools in mountain towns that had trout streams there, and I would be able to fish. And more importantly, really started to look for colleges that offered environmental majors and something that I could emphasize in fisheries with. So that was my main goal when it came to picking a college.
Sure. So that landed you in Utah?
Yep, I ended up going to Utah State University. They had a really cool outdoors program there, and the Logan River was right off of campus, and so I knew that it was pretty accessible. Visited there once, and that was the school. Moved out that next year. Awesome.
And claimed degree-wise, like right out of the gate, or did you just do general study stuff early on? Or
Yeah, right out of the gate. What's pretty cool about Utah State is you can go into a very broad environmental degree. It's called environmental studies, and from there you can kind of emphasize in something that you care about the most. So I really ended up taking a lot of fishing courses, a lot of environmental interpretation. That was where I learned how to start tying flies. I took fly tying for my PE credits, rod building for my PE credits. We even had a fly fishing class you could take for PE. So that was when I really first started to dip my toe into the world of fly fishing, was Utah State. And I think a huge part of choosing Utah State obviously was proximity to the river, the degree that I wanted. But for anyone that's looked for colleges in mountain towns, I mean, it's not cheap. You you can get in really deep going out of state and trying to go to a school that was in the mountains. So I think Utah State stood out to me the most because they have what's called concurrent residency. That was kind of the first thing I learned. And they'll allow you to attend school your first year and gain your residency and then switch you to an in-state student from there. So that was kind of my first my first money move there, that I knew where I wanted to be, knew I probably couldn't afford it. And so that was a huge part of choosing Utah State, was the residency purposes.
So you were able to go to school full time?
Yep.
And then is that the whole state of Utah, or just that university? Or?
Yeah, just Utah State was that one. So the U, they don't do concurrent residency. I had looked at a few out-of-state colleges, Gonzaga in Washington, I was really interested in. I looked at a couple Colorado schools, and then I was interested in the University of Minnesota as well. Just they had a bunch of lakes there. I heard that the fishing out there was cool. So definitely looked into that, but all of those schools, they don't do a concurrent residency. So you can't be enrolled in a university. You can't even go to a JUCO to gain your residency prior to going to the university. So it adds up pretty quick with out-of-state tuition for sure.
I bet. So when you're doing the concurrent deal, did you have to, I assume you then changed residency from Nebraska to Utah. So was it a full year, or was it just one? It was a full year. So you basically did a year and, well, I guess it would just go early summer to early summer, right? So
yeah,
you were fine. Your sophomore year, you were basically a resident of Utah.
Yeah,
then.
By the time of the beginning of my sophomore year, I was a resident of Utah, and the process was a little goofy in some ways. So you have to be there for, I believe it was 360 calendar days in a year. So they would give you a little bit of leeway to go back for holidays, but outside of that, they're pretty strict on it.
Yeah.
You have to turn in your credit card statements. You have to go independent from your parents on your taxes. You have to be registered to vote. You have to be working a job that you're paying taxes in Utah. Physical address there, no physical address tied anywhere else. So it is kind of a strict process, but definitely worth it to pay in-state tuition in an out-of-state college, you know.
Anymore, that's probably a $12,000 to $13,000 discount
for sure. Absolutely. I think it went from $30,000 a year out of state to $6,000 in state the next year. So definitely makes it worth it.
Yeah, for sure. So did you fish a bunch while you were in college?
Yeah, I really enjoyed fishing in college. That was really the first time I had ever met anyone else that knew how to fly fish, and I think that was a huge reason for wanting to go to college in a mountain town or in a town that had some sort of fishing scene. Is I just never really knew anyone else that did it. I didn't have anyone to ask questions to or help navigate in general, and so as soon as I got to Utah State, I was pretty hungry. I started, I would get on the old Tinder and swipe right on every fishing picture I saw, and just pick the brains of the boys that had fished that river before, and then go out and do it myself and on to the next kind of thing.
Cool.
Yep.
And local fly shop there that you'd hang out at or get some advice from, or was there one you primarily visited?
Yeah, so definitely, I mean, there's not really a fly shop in Logan, but there's Rivers Wild fly tying operation, and that's who we tied for class, just the PE courses I would take. We would tie over at Rivers Wild, and so they were always super helpful, always had flies on hand. We always tied patterns that were pretty specific to the Logan, and so I think they were a huge help as well. That was kind of my main point of contact when I first got there.
Cool. And then did you go back like freshman to sophomore year? Did you return back to Nebraska for the summers, or did you stick around there? Or? Yeah,
so for that first summer, I stuck around for those residency purposes. I had worked at a soda shop, which is a pretty Utah unique place to be. But yeah, so I slanged some sodas for that summer. But it was about that same year that I moved to Utah. I fished with a guy named Ben Diamond down in Heber City, Utah. He's the owner of Fish Heads Fly Shop. And that was kind of the first person I ever met that was willing to give me a little bit of a break, allow me to have a little bit of insight. And so it kind of started, he allowed me to kind of help run his social media. So from Rivers Wild, Ben was definitely the next big connection that I made. And I'll always enjoy Ben.
Yeah.
Saw him at IFTD this last year in Salt Lake. Always fun to run into old friends. But that was really my first experience of working in any sort of fly shop specific setting. Would have been with him.
Cool. And so if we move on, like sophomore to junior year, junior to senior year, you're obviously still fishing when you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
So
then summer employment then?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have to give a lot of credit to my older brother, Chase. Like I said, we come from a pretty small town. Not a lot of people ever leave and get out. And my brother, he found a website called coolworks.com. And on that website, you can find a lot of summer contracts. And so my brother his first couple years of college, he worked and lived in Glacier National Park. He worked for the Conservancy out there. And, I think it always piqued my interest. I just didn't quite know how to do it, but Chase really laid that foundation. And so I followed on that same path. So sophomore to junior year, I got on Coolworks as well. And I think it was definitely at that point I started to realize that I didn't really have the experience to walk into a fly shop and ask for a job. I didn't really have the baseline knowledge other than what I was receiving through my education. And so I thought the next best thing I could do would be to
Swipe right. Keep swiping right.
Yeah, keep swiping right. And after that fell through, I was, I just thought I would try to end up with a cool job in the outdoor industry in general. And I think definitely in Utah, I learned that, and I found this in Wyoming and pretty much anywhere I've traveled in the West is, a lot of people have seasonal sports. And so I knew if I could get a job that involved the outdoors, I would meet people that were involved in those seasonal sports, and fly fishing being one of them. So I also got on Coolworks. I found a job as a zipline tour guide in Park City, Utah. And so kind of the cool thing about that website and something I get asked about a lot is like, how do you afford to live in these places and take these jobs? And short answer is you can't, but you can take a summer contract. And when you find contracts like that, a lot of them will provide housing, or at least a housing stipend, and provide a food stipend, even rides to and from to get to work. You work with a lot of people that are on J1, JI visas. And so you get to work with a lot of people from around the world that have came in to do the same job. So I spent that next summer working as a zipline tour guide in Park City, living down there. Working about 60 hours a week and, not making much, but loving every minute of it. And I definitely found what I was looking for. I found a lot of people that fly fished and knew the area well. And so I think that was definitely the first summer I felt like I had my feet underneath me and was learning a lot more and was gaining the confidence to then go and find a job.
So did you guys just sneak out after work and fish a little bit? Or,
yeah, absolutely. Met some kids that had some private property we could go fish, and really just started to chat with a lot of people that knew so much and knew a bunch about fly tying. And so just kind of spent that summer zipline tour guiding and being a sponge as much as I could and listening to whatever advice people would give me around me. That was a pretty formative summer for me. Mm-hmm.
So we'll keep walking forward. Yeah,
so then I go back to school, and then kind of just out of a twisted turn of events, my brother had spent that time in Montana, and he applied for a job that placed him in Casper. And as I was living in Utah, it was the North Platte that was talked about. It was always talked about coming up here and fishing up here. So it definitely piqued my interest. And when my brother moved out here, before I ever had an inkling I would ever work for the Ugly Bug and Crazy Rainbow, we took a guided trip out here. And I think that was obviously the first time I was like, oh shit, like this is the Mecca. This is what people talk about, And, did that float trip, caught some amazing fish. And I was just so enamored with everything that was offered up this way. I've just never seen trout of that size. I've never seen trout fight like that. I've never seen a technical river as such. I had never seen guides that rode their asses off like they did up here through wind, rain, snow. It was the Wild West to me, and I was really intrigued by that. And I met a nice lady who runs our lodge right now, Miss Lori, and she told me that she had a daughter named Addie who was a guide. And I think right then and there, I kind of hit the ground running. I think I asked Lori for Addie's number. and texted Addie right off the bat. She gave me a text back. And then really from there, I started doing all the research that I could about being up here, and obviously stalked you, obviously stalked Addie a bunch. And I decided that I wanted to work here. I was pretty dead set on that. And I think that was in 2019, around there. And so I came back and I booked a full day float. Guide requested Addie on it to ensure that I could spend a full day with Addie. And I was pretty transparent, right? When I got on the boat, I told her I was here for a job. I wanted to fish, but I wanted to come work here. And we fished that day. Addie and I hit it off. And I think even more so at that point, I don't think I've ever been more driven to want to work somewhere and live somewhere and, seeing an operation as such. Once again, I never imagined we'd be 4 seasons down the road at this point.
Right.
But, it was a really cool experience. I thought Addie was badass, and I thought everyone that worked there was badass, and that was my goal. I had my eyes set on it for sure.
Cool. Yeah, she is that. Mm-hmm. She's a badass.
Yep.
So. I remember her coming back and telling me, pretty quickly that oh, you won't believe who I fished with, and kind of explained it. And, I don't think it was long after that I gave you a ring.
Yeah.
Kind of caught you by surprise when I just called you, but
yeah. So Blake called me kind of out of the blue. I had just gotten back from class that day, and I think he shot me a text first that we were going to interview, and I was shitting my pants because a day before that I had box dyed my hair pink. I was like, fuck, man. I was like, this dude's going to try to FaceTime me or something. I'm going to have pink hair. He's going to think I'm fucking crazy. And so I vividly remember in my apartment with my roommates, we were trying to tuck it behind my ears and put a hat over so that it didn't look like I had no hair, but you couldn't really see that I had pink hair. But then, thank the Lord above, it ended up being a phone call instead of a FaceTime. So, that's a pretty formative memory.
Yeah,
of mine. But
and then when you first showed up here, when you came and started working, was it a shocker as to the scope of what we do, or the scope of the business, or
the
industry itself? Or
it was pretty crazy. Well, I think the first crazy part of it is, after I think we maybe talked in January or December, and then it was maybe 2 months later that COVID hit. And woke up one morning, all classes were online, and I lived in housing that was so close to campus that pretty much we were told, hey, you gotta boogie out of here. We're shutting everything down. And so I was just shitting bricks at that point because I had, I felt so close, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to do this anymore. So I packed up and I moved home to Nebraska. Because we couldn't stay at school, started doing the online school thing there. And then in March, I got a phone call from Addie again, and she said, hey, if you want to come work, you got to come now. I said, perfect. I woke up the next morning, flew back to Utah, packed up my shit from my apartment, and drove right up here. And I think I started the next day. Like I said, my brother was living here at the time, so he let me couch surf that first summer. And it definitely was a shock. I mean, I think I didn't really have a scope of what the fly fishing industry was growing up in Nebraska. Once again, I just didn't know. I didn't even really know people that left the state, let alone fly fished or had, kind of any sort of mountain outdoor activity. I just had never met people like that. And so I think that the first shell shock I had when I started working there was I realized, what's going on here is an operation. It's not a dick around. Any sort of job like that, there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of people that care about what they do. And I think that was kind of my first shock, that I realized that, fly fishing, especially the inner workings of a shop and a guide service, are much more intricate than it looks like from the outside world. It's not just taking phone calls and bullshitting. It's there's a lot more that goes into it.
Yeah, there's an actual business behind it.
Yeah,
right,
for sure.
And at times it's pretty hectic and busy, and other times it's kind of slow and we can have fun, but we try to keep it hectic and busy as much as we can.
For
right?
sure. So, and it normally stays that way.
Yeah. And so, obviously you started fishing more and more, obviously being here, and your brother fishes a ton. So who you were hanging with was fishing
Yeah.
the Platte a lot.
I was with a pretty fishy crew.
Yeah.
Kind of running the same MO of seeing what free float trips I could get off the old Tinder and,
Yeah.
Seeing what I could do there. But yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that really surprised me is, once again, not quite having the scope of fly fishing. I didn't really understand that you could work in fly fishing without sitting on a drift boat. And I think that that's what I was always pretty nervous about, is that I maybe didn't have the size or the stature to do that. And so I felt like it was pretty impossible to edge my way in to things. But very quickly, I realized that this was a job I could choose as a career path. It didn't have to be behind a boat, and that I could still have a really fulfilling position and do some fulfilling work without rowing clients down the river. And I think that was kind of a really eye-opening thing for me, is that, I found a lot of peace and a lot of enjoyment in my job. And it's crazy. It's hectic sometimes, You meet some interesting people, run around with some funny folk. But I think that was another really eye-opening part is, breaking into the industry always seemed so unobtainable, but that was when I first realized that I could, find my niche and find my spot in it and get some comfort out of that. So that first year was also crazy formative. It definitely went from rigging Blake's rods and reels wrong, putting a nice little Winston in the fan, a lot of mishaps that first year, asking questions that were probably the dumbest questions ever. I mean, obviously, fishing the Logan, it's just a little tiny tributary. It's nothing crazy. You throw a purple haze on there, and you just got to get the damn thing in the water, and you'll catch something.
Right.
Working on a more technical river with more diverse entomology and really having to focus on flies and depth and weight. All of those intricacies were things I had never really learned before.
Right.
And so I think, once again, that was a crazy formative time for me, where I was able to sit and bullshit with you in your office and, convince guides to grab a beer with me and chat fishing, and convince guides to get me on a drift boat so that I could work on my cast and see what they were seeing. I also spent that time as a sponge as well. I had so much to learn, and I didn't even know it at the time, but I mean, looking back, I even laugh at myself sometimes of just, putting like fucking gink on leeches and shit,
But it's always a weird time, when you're someone that's running a shop or owning a shop, or it's always a weird, often in fly fishing, there's a weird scope of, in the winter months, you're slow enough, you really don't need all that much help, right? And then seasonally, you bring in a bunch of seasonal help, but then you start getting so busy that you really don't have time to like mentor, educate, or train the way you would like to. But and it's really just because it's a light switch, right?
Yeah.
Like season starts, it's go, and then so whoever, like myself, my schedule gets hectic enough that there's times you wouldn't see me for a week or 10 days, and then I'd show back up, and it's kind of tough to train and mentor someone in a sense. Just you kind of have to be a quick learner and learn by watching and paying attention to other people and figure it out that way.
Jump into it for sure. I think that like a crazy helpful part of just being at the Ugly Bug in specific, not that I'm trying to, suck anyone's dick or anything here, but, pretty cool part about working at the Ugly Bug, and maybe something I just hadn't experienced before that. There is always that weird patronizing portion of being a chick that works in the fishing industry. You're almost doted upon in some ways. You aren't necessarily expected to do all the same work and have all the same knowledge. And so, I'll always be grateful just for being given the opportunity to come work here. Once again, not to patronize anyone, but I'll always be grateful for that opportunity. But I think a pretty badass part about working at the Bug is I've never felt like I was necessarily treated like a girl. I think that, I came in and my expectations of work ethic and knowledge and, ability to talk to customers and manage schedules and trips and stuff, it was the exact same as anyone else I was working with. And I think that's a little more important in some ways, is that it doesn't have to be this huge noble crusade of having women on the water, women working in the industry. It's more just about being there and being able to work and work in the same way as your male counterparts. I think that's it's pretty important,
No, ultimately, I mean, obviously I think it's a valuable thing to have women in the shop, but I'm also pretty blunt in the fact that, like, if you can't handle the work, then I'll find someone else, right?
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a woman. It's who's the best
Anyone who's
person I
gonna
could
do
find to fill the position, right? I mean, I think there's value in it both ways, but or value in having gals around, but ultimately there's a scope of work that needs to get hammered out, and I've never thought it made any sense to treat anyone any different than and maybe to my own fault, right? At times I'm pretty blunt and can speak pretty openly, but
Blake's just getting used to tampons in the bathroom.
Yeah,
We're slowly edging that in there. But
So if you were to give someone looking to break into the industry, figure it out, try to find a way to make a living at it, what kind of advice would you drop their way?
I mean, there's a couple things. I think that there's a lot of roads that lead to Rome when it comes to fly fishing or being in the industry in general. I mean, especially for people, maybe in my position that just didn't grow up around fly fishing industry. I didn't have a home shop, home river. I just didn't have those things. If you ever have the opportunity to go to college, I would take that, and I would take that for all it's worth. I've moved around a little bit, and I'll be the first to say college is the easiest. That's the easiest move for sure. You have a built-in friend group. You all of a sudden are plopped on a campus where, you can find hundreds of people that are interested in the same things that you are. And if college is an option, absolutely, I would recommend, being realistic about your career options from there on out. And for that reason, finding colleges with concurrent residencies, really focusing on colleges that offer your major. But once again, that's easier said than done. And I think I'll always be grateful for the opportunity of education, but I also will be the first to acknowledge that not everyone has that. And so from there, my next advice would be to look into summer contracts. If you need to work a job, or even if you're finishing up high school, or you're just looking to do something different, I would check out, I've always found coolworks.com to be credible. Once again, my brother has as well. I've sent a lot of friends there, a lot of people younger than me that kind of ask how to get into the outdoor industry in general. That's kind of the first thing I point to. I mean, even on there, if school's not for you and that's not on the table, you can find yearly contracts on there that will provide housing and food. And at the very least, even if it isn't exactly what you want to do, you're going to place yourself in the same areas that have the things that you do want to do. And so I think that would kind of be my big first thing, is take the leap to be where you need to be. And even if you are from a mountain town, go try something different. I think it's easy to get comfortable with your home river and forget that, there's some other intricacies that come along with other rivers that you may not know. And the more well-rounded you can be about it, the better. Yeah. I mean, I would definitely recommend that for sure. And then outside of that, be annoying, do the stalking, do the emails, do the text messages, I think that, people are perceptive, and I think people understand kind of passion and drive when they see it. And even if you think you're being annoying and that you're asking too much or bothering someone too much, I mean, until they tell you to fuck off, there's really no reason to stop, Yep. And so I think that would be a huge part of it, is that, it can be difficult. I think a lot of fly fishing is so small. It really is a community. And I think the more you get into it and the more you're surrounded by it, the more you realize that everyone is connected in some way, shape, or form, which can be intimidating. Coming in as an outsider, you feel like you may be beat out by the kid that knows him, that knows him, that knows her, that knows him, and make some space for yourself if need be. I mean, I'm pretty sure there was a point in there Addie could have called the cops on me if she wanted to. And, kind of be relentless in your endeavors. And I think the ultimate lesson and the ultimate advice is don't do it if you don't give a shit about it, know?
For sure.
I think that it's definitely a lifestyle. It's a choice. And that's not to say that it's a bad choice in any way, shape, or form. I think there's definitely ways to figure it out and to still lead a very full and happy and, not live with financial restraints doing it. But if you're not sold on it in your heart and soul, don't do it. But if you feel like that's what you want to do, passion's recognized always, just like you said. I think that a give a shit is hard to find.
Yeah.
And that means a lot. And so you just got to give a shit about it. And the more that you do, the better off you'll be. And the more people that you'll meet and you'll be able to network with, and hopefully end up in a position like I have, where I work for a company I respect fully. And once again, I think that's quite a lost art, and you can't find love for a job in a call center.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just got to put yourself out there and see what happens, and it'll work out at some point.
Cool.
But yeah.
Good note to end on.
Alrighty.
Thanks, C. Places people can find you.
You can find me on Instagram, CiCi_but_outside. So yeah, hit me up on there. But any questions, absolutely feel free to reach out. Yeah.
Sweet C. Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to the Ugly Bug Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you have questions or feedback, reach out to us via email at info@uglybugpodcast.com or leave a comment on our social networks.